I want to be upfront with you about something before I start. The place I manage does not show up on Google Maps. It is not on TripAdvisor. It is not on Booking.com or Expedia or any of those platforms. If you search the name, you get nothing. The only way people find us is through word of mouth, and the word that gets passed around about this place is not always the kind that makes people feel good about coming. Some guests leave here and get a promotion within the month. One woman drove out on a Sunday afternoon and met her husband at a gas station 17 miles down the road. They got married 8 months later, and she still sends us a Christmas card every year. A retired school teacher from Ohio came for a long weekend 2 summers ago and told me on checkout that she had spent every night sitting on the porch listening to the ocean and that something had shifted in her chest that had been stuck for 11 years. She cried a little when she said it, and I did not know what to do, so I just nodded and handed her a receipt. But then there are the other stories. A man from Portland checked out on a Tuesday and turned up at a gas station in Crescent City 4 days later with no memory of where he had been. A couple from Sacramento came back 3 times in 2 years, and on their 3rd visit, the wife told me quietly at the front desk that she did not think they should come back again. She did not say why. Her husband was already loading the car. I did not push her. I have been managing this place for 11 months now. Before that, my grandmother Cressida ran it for nearly 50 years. She started when she was 32 years old with $11,000, a parcel of land on the Northern California coast, and a set of rules she never put in writing until I was old enough to ask why. My name is Aldous. I grew up here. My parents left when I was 3 years old, and I have no memory of either of them beyond a photograph my grandmother kept in a drawer and showed me once when I was about 8. She did not offer information about them, and I learned early not to ask. What I had instead was Cressida and this place. 12 rooms on a strip of land between the Redwood Forest and the Pacific Ocean, 17 miles north of the nearest town, with a private trail down to a small cove called Coral Cove and a basement parking garage that I will get to shortly. Cressida was not a warm person in the conventional sense. She did not bake cookies or hug easily or say "I love you" out loud. What she did was teach me things. She taught me how to run a generator, how to read weather coming in off the water, how to talk to people who were upset without making it worse, and how to manage a piece of land that does not entirely belong to you. That last one was the most important lesson, and it took me the longest to understand. She had a sentence she came back to over and over throughout my entire childhood and into my adult life. I heard it so many times that by the time I was a teenager, I had stopped really hearing it at all. It was not until after she died that the words started to mean something to me the way they meant something to her. She would say, "This land doesn't belong to us, we're just borrowing it." She died in November. I found her in the morning sitting in the wooden chair by the window that looks out toward the tree line, her hands in her lap, a coffee mug on the side table that had gone cold. She looked entirely peaceful, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment before I understood what I was looking at. She was 81 years old, and she had never, in my lifetime, been seriously ill. I want to tell you about the week before she died. Something happened that I still think about. A guest named Paul stayed for 3 nights, and when he checked out, he stopped at the front desk and told me that he had heard someone outside his window every night around 2 in the morning. He was in room 7 on the 2nd floor. His window faces the forest. He said it was not footsteps exactly. It was more like something standing very still just below the glass. I told him I would look into it. He nodded and left, and I watched his truck pull down the gravel drive and disappear around the bend in the trees. I did not look into it because I already knew there was nothing to find. That particular stretch of ground outside room 7 does things sometimes. It has been doing things for as long as I can remember. Cressida always said to leave it alone, and I have always left it alone, and nothing has come of it. That is the general philosophy of this place. A few weeks ago, something happened at Coral Cove that put a guest in the emergency room and cost a young man part of his finger. That is where this story is going. But to understand how we got there, you need to understand the rules first, all 3 of them. And you need to understand why they exist, or at least as much of the why as I actually know, which is less than I would like and more than most people would be comfortable with. Cressida used to say the rules were not hers. She did not make them up. She learned them the same way I learned them, which is by watching what happened when they were followed and what happened when they were not. So let me start at the beginning. Cressida's funeral was small, 12 people, not counting myself, in a funeral home in town. She had not wanted a church service. She had not wanted a lot of flowers. What she had wanted, according to the handwritten note I found in the top drawer of her desk 3 days after she died, was to be cremated and have her ashes scattered at the base of the large oak tree behind the main building. The same oak tree where my grandfather was buried 40 years ago, according to his own wishes, before I was born. I followed her instructions exactly. The first weeks of running the place alone were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. The logistical parts I could handle. I had been helping Cressida manage the property since I was old enough to be useful. I knew how to handle bookings, maintenance calls, guest complaints, the particular challenge of explaining to someone from the city why their cell signal was going to be unreliable for their entire stay. I knew the systems. What I did not know how to replicate was Cressida herself. She had a way of moving through this property that I can only describe as purposeful in every direction. She talked to things. Not loudly, not in a way that guests would overhear and find alarming, but she would walk past the old oak and say something quietly, or pause at the edge of the trail down to Coral Cove and stand for a moment with her eyes closed before continuing. I had watched her do these things my entire life and absorbed them as background, the way you absorb anything that is always present. When she was gone and I was the one walking those same paths, I felt the absence of those small habits immediately. I started doing my own version of them, awkwardly at first. I felt self-conscious standing in front of a tree and speaking out loud to no one visible. But I kept at it because Cressida had kept at it for 50 years, and the evidence suggested she knew something I did not. The morning ritual was the most concrete thing she had passed on to me. Every morning without exception, she made 2 coffees, one for herself and one in a specific red mug that lived on the second shelf of the kitchen cabinet and was not used for guests. She carried the red mug and a small white bowl of sugar out to the oak tree behind the main building, set them down on the flat stone at the base of the trunk, where my grandfather's grave marker sits, and spent a few minutes sitting cross-legged on the ground before coming back inside. She had explained this to me when I was about 10 years old. She said the land had small residents that most people could not see, and that these residents had an arrangement with us. We acknowledged them, we left them something. They in turn kept things relatively balanced. She did not use the word ghosts, she did not use the word spirits, she just said the small ones and left it at that. She said they were not evil, just territorial and sensitive, and that if you ignored them for long enough, they would start reminding you of their presence in ways that were inconvenient. I took over the morning ritual after she died. Red mug, white bowl of sugar, same flat stone, every morning at 6. The first few times I felt ridiculous, but by the second week it had become something I looked forward to. 5 minutes of sitting outside in the early morning before the day started. Whatever was or was not receiving that coffee and sugar, the quiet was real. And the offerings always disappeared. Every single morning. I checked once around 11, and the mug and bowl were always empty and clean, as if someone had rinsed them. No birds had knocked them over. No insects had gotten into them. No footprints in the soft ground around the base of the tree. They were simply empty. I tried setting up a small camera once, angled at the stone from a branch about 8 feet up. I watched the footage the next morning. The video was clear and uninterrupted from the moment I placed the mug and bowl at 6:03 until 6:14 when the screen went to solid white static. The static lasted exactly 11 minutes. When the picture came back, the mug and bowl were empty, and I was no longer visible in the frame. I did not try the camera again. 2 things Cressida told me about the small ones that I have thought about often since taking over. First, that they were not interested in elaborate offerings. Coffee and sugar were enough because they were genuine and consistent. She said sincerity mattered more than quantity. Second, that they were easily forgotten by people who were busy or distracted, and that being forgotten was what caused problems, not malice, neglect. I think about that second one a lot when I consider what happened with the college students. They showed up on a Friday afternoon in 2 cars, 5 of them total, 3 men and 2 women. The first car pulled in around 3 in the afternoon with Tyler at the wheel. Tyler was the kind of person who makes his presence known immediately, not rudely exactly, just loudly. He wore a wireless speaker clipped to his backpack and was playing music through it as he walked from the car to the front desk, which I asked him politely to turn down, and he did without argument. His 2 friends were Marcus and Devon. Marcus was quiet, observant, the kind of person who looks at things carefully before speaking. Devon was somewhere in between, friendly but with a slight distance to him, like someone who was present but keeping part of himself in reserve. The second car arrived 20 minutes later with Priya and Lee. Priya was Tyler's girlfriend, and she was sharp and direct in a way I found immediately easier to deal with than Tyler's volume. Lee was the one who made me pay the closest attention. She was the only one of the 5 who picked up the brochure I set out at the front desk and actually read it before I had said anything about it. I give every guest a brochure at check-in. It is a single folded card, printed cleanly, 3 rules listed on the inside. The outside says, "Thank you for staying with us. Please read the following before settling in. These are not suggestions." Tyler took his copy, glanced at it for approximately 2 seconds and put it in his back pocket. Marcus opened his and read the first rule and then folded it again. Devon did not open his at all. Priya read through it and looked up at me with an expression I could not entirely read. Lee read it through twice. I went through the rules out loud when I handed over the room keys. I do this with every guest regardless of whether they have read the brochure. I said there are 3 things I need you to be aware of during your stay. First, any tree on the property with a red ribbon tied around the trunk is off limits. Do not cut, break, or touch the branches. Do not step on the root systems or the low brush around the base. If for any reason you need to rest under one of those trees, you need to ask permission out loud first, and when you leave, you say thank you out loud. It sounds strange. I understand that. Please do it anyway. Tyler started to smile. I kept going. Second, this building has an elevator that goes down to the underground parking level. If you are in that elevator and a woman in a red coat gets in with you, greet her politely according to the time of day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. She may know your name. Do not ask how. Do not ask who she is. Do not be rude. If something goes wrong in the parking garage, I will explain separately how to handle that. Priya said, what does something goes wrong mean? I said, hopefully it won't come up. And third, Coral Cove at the end of the beach trail is available to guests, but you may not take anything from it. Not sand, not shells, not stones, not plant material. If you accidentally pick something up, put it back before you leave the area. If you have already left the area with something, bring it back and return it as close to where you found it as possible. This one is the most important rule. I want to be clear about that. Devon said, is this some kind of immersive experience thing, like part of the booking? I said no. There was a short silence. Lee said, okay, we'll read it again tonight. Tyler laughed a little, not mean-spirited, just the laugh of someone who does not believe something but is willing to play along. I handed him his room key and said, enjoy your stay. There are 14 trees on this property, with red ribbons tied around their trunks. Cressida put the first ribbons up in the early years when she was still learning which trees were which, and did not want to accidentally mark the wrong ones. The ribbons have been replaced over the decades as they weathered and frayed. I now use a particular type of red nylon cord that holds up well in coastal weather. The 14 trees are scattered across the property in no pattern I have ever been able to identify as intentional. 2 are close to the main building. Several are along the forest edge. The largest one, an oak that I estimate to be over 200 years old based on its diameter, stands directly behind the main building next to my grandfather's grave. Cressida explained the trees to me in stages as I got older. The early version she gave me as a small child was simple. Those trees have someone living in them, and you should not bother that someone the same way you would not bother a person sitting quietly in their own house. As I got older, the explanation became more specific. She called them the tall red-handed ones. She said they were old and large and not particularly friendly, but also not interested in causing harm unless provoked. She said they liked to smoke, which I know sounds absurd, but she was completely serious when she said it. She said if you sat near one of the marked trees on a still evening, you might catch a smell that had no source. I have caught that smell twice in my adult life, both times on evenings when the air was completely still. The rule about asking permission was not ceremony. Cressida was specific about this. It was a practical communication. The asking had to be genuine and clear. You had to state your reason. You had to say what you were going to do and for how long. And you had to say thank you when you were done out loud before you walked away. She said the not saying thank you was the most common mistake because people remembered to ask and then forgot to close the exchange. 2 days after the 5 college students arrived, I was walking the forest trail at the northern edge of the property, doing a routine check of the path markers. The trail gets overgrown quickly in fall, and guests sometimes lose the path. I was about a quarter mile in when I heard a sound that was out of place. A scraping, repetitive sound, metal on wood. I followed it and found a man I had not previously encountered sitting at the base of one of the ribbon trees with a small folding knife, scoring a piece of branch that was resting across his knee. He was not a member of the student group. He was a different guest who had checked in 2 days earlier, a man in his early 40s named Greg, who had come with his girlfriend for what he described at check-in as a digital detox weekend. Greg had snapped a branch from the ribbon tree and was carving it. I stopped walking and said, "I need you to put that down." He looked up. He said it was just a dead branch. It was already half off. I said, "That does not matter. That tree has a red ribbon on it. The rules cover all parts of the tree, including branches on the ground." He looked at the ribbon. He had clearly not noticed it or had not connected it to what I had said at check-in. He said I wasn't going to take it off the property. I was just doing something with my hands. I said, "I understand. I still need you to put it down." He held my eye for a moment, and I held his back without blinking. He put the branch down on the ground. I said thank you and asked him to head back toward the main building, which he did without further argument, though his posture told me he thought the whole thing was unreasonable. I stood at the base of the tree after he left. I said out loud that I was sorry for the disturbance and that I had addressed it. I felt the same mild self-consciousness I always feel when doing this, and I stood there for another minute before walking back. The following afternoon, Greg went to the North Beach. This is the stretch of shore directly north of the property boundary where the water is colder and the current runs differently than at Coral Cove. There is a permanent advisory sign posted at the trailhead that reads, "Strong rip currents, no swimming." The sign has been there for 9 years, and I have never personally seen anyone ignore it. Greg ignored it. A man named Franklin, who was staying in room 3 and who goes for a long walk every afternoon, saw Greg in the water struggling against a current about 40 yards out. Franklin is 63 years old and a former high school swim coach, and he is also not a small man. He went in after Greg without hesitating, which is the kind of thing that makes you grateful certain people exist in the world. Franklin got Greg back to the shore. Greg was not seriously injured, but he was badly shaken and had taken in a significant amount of water. When I got to the beach and Greg had recovered enough to speak, I asked him what had happened. He said he had just been walking along the waterline. He said he had not intended to go in. He said one moment he was on the dry sand and the next he was in the water past his waist and the current was pulling. He said he had not felt himself walking in. He did not know how to explain it. I did not say anything to Greg about the tree. It was not a productive conversation to have in that moment, and honestly, it is never a productive conversation to have. People either understand or they don't, and you can't force the understanding. Greg and his girlfriend checked out the next morning. He shook my hand at the desk, which I thought was decent of him. I want to tell you about another incident that happened before my time because it is relevant to understanding the pattern. Cressida documented it in one of her notebooks, which I have read through several times since she passed. A guest named Danny came to stay for a week about 7 years ago. He was an experienced climber, the kind of person who spends weekends on technical rock faces for recreation. On his second day, he climbed one of the ribbon trees to photograph the coastline from above. Cressida heard him from inside the main building and came out to stop him, but he was already 15 feet up. He fell. The branch he was holding onto did not break. His grip did not slip. According to the notes Cressida took afterward based on Danny's own account, he said it felt as though something had simply removed his hands from the branch, the way you might peel a piece of tape off a surface, deliberate and precise. He broke his arm in 3 places. The ER doctor noted in the chart that the break pattern was consistent with someone who had fallen, but also with torsional force applied from multiple directions simultaneously, which was unusual enough that the doctor mentioned it twice. Danny did not sue. He came back the following year and made a point of walking past every ribbon tree on the property and saying, out loud, that he was sorry. He told me about it when I was helping Cressida that summer. He said he felt like he owed them something. I thought that was a reasonably sensible response given the circumstances. The only time I personally had to invoke the permission ritual for an actual task was in the 2nd week after taking over from Cressida. A severe storm had come through 2 nights earlier, and a large secondary branch on the oak behind the main building had split partially and was hanging at an angle that made it a safety hazard for anyone passing beneath it. The branch was still attached at one point, but the weight of it was going to bring it down eventually, and I could not predict where. I stood at the base of that tree for a few minutes before I picked up the chainsaw. I said out loud that I needed to remove the damaged branch because it was dangerous and that I was going to take only what was necessary and nothing else. I said I would work quickly and carefully, and I said thank you before I started the saw. I cut the branch and hauled it away, and nothing happened. I said thank you again when I was finished, which felt slightly redundant, but Cressida had always been clear that closing the exchange was not optional. The branch I cut up and stacked at the edge of the wood pile. I did not use it for firewood that winter. It felt wrong to burn it. I left it to weather naturally, and it is still sitting there at the edge of the pile. I want to describe the morning ritual more precisely, because I think it matters to this story, and I have only sketched it so far. 6 in the morning, I get up before any guests are moving. The kitchen at that hour is quiet, and I make 1 coffee for myself in whatever mug is clean and 1 coffee in the red mug. The red mug is ceramic, a deep brick red with a small chip on the rim from some time before I was born. It has never been washed in a dishwasher. Cressida hand-washed it, and I hand-wash it. I do not know if that matters, but I do it the way she did it. The white bowl is a small ceramic bowl, the kind you would use for dipping sauce. I fill it with plain white sugar, a generous amount, maybe 3 tablespoons. I carry both out to the oak tree. The flat stone at the base of the trunk is about the size of a hardback book. My grandfather's name is not on it. Nothing is on it. It is just a smooth grey stone that has been in that position for as long as anyone in my family can account for. I set the red mug on the left side and the white bowl on the right. Then I sit down on the ground with my legs crossed, with my back to the building, facing the forest. I do not pray. I am not sure to whom I would be praying. I do not ask for anything, partly because Cressida said the small ones did not like riddles or requests, and partly because I genuinely have not yet figured out what I would ask for if I were going to ask. I sit for about 5 minutes. Sometimes the forest is completely silent. Sometimes there are birds, woodpeckers in the distance, the sound of something moving in the dry leaves. A couple of times I have heard what I can only describe as a very low, very brief sound from somewhere in the tree above me. Not a creak, not wind in branches, something deliberate. I do not look up when I hear it. I learned that from Cressida. She said looking up was asking a question you might not want answered. After 5 minutes, I go back inside and start the day. The mug and bowl are always empty by 11. Always, without exception. In 11 months, I have not had a single morning where I came back to find anything left. Even on the mornings when rain was coming in sideways off the ocean, and I had to sprint from the back door to the stone and back, the offerings disappeared on the same schedule as every other morning. The one time Cressida was sick and sent me out in her place, I was 14. I set everything down correctly and then immediately stood up and went back inside because I was 14 and it was cold, and I was embarrassed to sit in the yard alone talking to a tree. I did not sit. I did not spend the 5 minutes. That night the power went out for the entire property. No storms, no downed lines. The power company sent a crew out and spent 4 hours finding no explanation, and then the power simply came back on at 3 in the morning. They filed it under unexplained equipment failure. I have never cut the ritual short since then. There is one other thing I will tell you about the ritual because it is relevant to what happened later. The morning after I completed the 3-day atonement ceremony at Coral Cove, which I will get to, I sat at the base of the oak tree, and for the first time since Cressida died, I said something out loud while sitting there. I said thank you, just those 2 words. I did not specify what I was thanking anyone for. I just said it and sat with it for a moment. When I came back at 11, the mug and bowl were empty as always, but there was something different. The chip on the rim of the red mug, the chip that has been there since before I was born, was gone. The rim was smooth and complete. I ran my finger around it 3 times to make sure I was not imagining it. I set the mug back on the shelf, and I have not mentioned this to anyone until now. The underground parking garage below the main building holds 30 vehicles in a space about the size of a regulation basketball court. It has 1 elevator and 1 vehicle ramp. The elevator is original to the building, installed in 1974, updated with new wiring in 2009, but otherwise unchanged. It is the kind of elevator that has a folding metal gate inside the sliding outer door, and it moves slowly enough that you have time to notice the floor numbers changing. The rule about the woman in the red coat was the first rule Cressida ever explained to me in full. I was 7 years old, and she sat me down at the kitchen table specifically to tell me this. She said, if you are in the elevator going down to the parking level and a woman in a red coat gets in, you greet her. You say good morning or good afternoon or good evening depending on the time. She will know your name. You do not ask how. You do not ask who she is. You are polite and normal, and when the elevator opens you go about your day. 7-year-old me asked what would happen if I was not polite. Cressida said, you'll get lost in the parking garage and not be able to find the exit. I said, that's a small garage. She said, size has nothing to do with it. I did not fully understand what that meant until I was 19 and had my first encounter with the woman myself. I had come back from a year away, a year I spent at a state university, before deciding that what I actually needed to do was come home and help Cressida. She had not asked me to come back. I came back because I missed the property, and because something about being away from it felt consistently wrong in a way I could not articulate to anyone without sounding unstable. I came back on a Thursday in October. That evening around 11, I went down to the parking garage to get a box from my car. I used the elevator because the vehicle ramp is steep and not meant for foot traffic. She was standing in the corner of the elevator when the door opened. The woman wears a red wool coat that reaches to her shins. Her hair is grey and pulled back. She is not translucent, not glowing, not visually different from any other person you might encounter in an elevator. She looks like a person. She stands with her hands at her sides and she looks straight ahead toward the doors. I had 11 years of knowing she existed and 0 actual experience of encountering her, and when the elevator door opened and I saw her standing there, my entire body went cold and I nearly stepped back out of the elevator on instinct. I stepped in. She said, "Good evening, Aldous." My voice was steady. I do not know how. I said, "Good evening." The elevator descended. It is a short ride, maybe 15 seconds. She did not say anything else. When the doors opened at the parking level, she was not there. I do not mean she walked out ahead of me. I mean the corner of the elevator was empty. Between the doors opening and me looking back, she was simply gone. I stood in the parking garage for about 2 minutes before I felt capable of walking to my car. She has appeared to me 4 times since then. Each time the encounter is the same. She greets me, I greet her. The elevator reaches the parking level and she is gone. I have never attempted to ask her anything or deviate from the exchange in any way. I have never felt the need to test it. The backstory that Cressida passed on to me comes from the people who lived in this area before the resort was built. There was a fishing community along this stretch of coast going back to the early 20th century. In 1953, a storm came in fast off the Pacific and several boats were lost. One person in particular, the details vary depending on who is telling the story, drowned within swimming distance of shore. 3 days after the storm, a red wool coat washed up on the beach below where the main building now stands. No body was ever recovered. Is the woman in the elevator that person? I genuinely do not know. Cressida did not know either, or if she did, she never told me. What Cressida knew was that the woman had been appearing in that elevator since before the elevator was installed, which makes no logical sense but is nevertheless what the previous structure's records indicate. And Cressida knew the rule worked. If you were polite, you rode the elevator and went about your day. If you were not, you did not find the exit. Harrison checked in on a Wednesday morning in March, about 3 months into my tenure. He was a corporate attorney from San Francisco, according to the information he filled out on the registration form. He arrived 45 minutes before check-in time and was unhappy about the wait. He was unhappy about the cell signal. He was unhappy about the absence of complimentary bottled water in the room, which we do not offer. And he was unhappy in a specific vocal way that made the 2 other guests in the lobby at the time visibly uncomfortable. I gave him the brochure and went through the rules. He was looking at his phone while I spoke. I said, "Mr. Harrison, I would appreciate your full attention for this part of the check-in." He looked up, he said, "I've stayed at hotels before." I said, "This particular hotel has some specific policies. The elevator down to the parking garage is one of them. Please take a moment." He took a moment, perfunctorily. That evening around 7:30, my front desk phone rang. It was Harrison. He said, "There's something wrong with your parking garage. I've been walking around down here for 20 minutes and I cannot find the ramp out." I said, "Did you encounter anyone in the elevator on your way down?" A pause, he said, "There was a woman. I asked her who she was and how she knew my name, and she didn't answer me, and I told her that was rude." I closed my eyes briefly. I said, "I'm coming down." I took the stairs, not the elevator, because the elevator during one of these situations is not where I want to be. I found Harrison standing in the center of the parking level. He was in full suit and tie, carrying a laptop bag, and his composure was significantly reduced from that morning. He was breathing quickly and his eyes were moving around the space in a way that told me he had been genuinely frightened. I said, "I need you to take off your jacket, turn it inside out and put it back on. Then take off your shirt and turn that inside out too. Same with your pants if you're willing to do that." He stared at me. I said, "I know how it sounds, please do it." He did it, all of it, including the pants, standing in the parking garage in his undershirt and socks, methodically turning each piece of clothing inside out and putting it back on. I will say this for Harrison. When he was actually scared, he followed instructions without argument. When he was fully dressed again, I said, "Now walk toward the corner column on your left and turn the corner past it." He walked, he turned the corner. The vehicle ramp was right there, exactly where it always is. He stopped and looked at it for a moment. He said that was not there before. I said, "I know." He turned around and looked at me. He said, "What is in this building?" I said, "I don't know the full answer to that. What I can tell you is that the rule about the elevator exists for a reason, and I explained it to you at check-in." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology for this morning." I said, "It's all right." He said, "No, it's not. I was rude and dismissive, and I've just spent 40 minutes lost in a 30-space parking garage." He paused. "How is that possible?" I said, "I don't have an explanation that would satisfy you." He nodded slowly. He said, "Fair enough." Harrison checked out the next morning, 2 days ahead of his reservation. He left the full balance without requesting a refund, which I had not expected. There was a handwritten note on the checkout form that said only, "I'm sorry about this morning, Harrison." I put the note in Cressida's file of documented incidents, where it still is. Coral Cove is about a quarter mile down the private trail from the main building. You pass through a section of low scrub, and then the land opens up and you can see the water. The cove is naturally sheltered on three sides by rock formations that rise maybe 30 feet above the water line. The water inside the cove is genuinely remarkable. It is clear in a way that coastal water rarely is, and the color changes throughout the day, green in the morning and deep blue by afternoon. The bottom is visible even in the deepest part of the cove, which is about 12 feet at high tide. When Cressida first explained the third rule to me, I was probably 6 or 7. She said, "Coral Cove has residents, not like us. You don't take things from their home, same as you wouldn't walk into someone's house and take things off their shelves." I asked her what the residents looked like. She said, "I've only seen them at the edge. In low light, I wouldn't recommend looking for them." I swam in Coral Cove many hundreds of times growing up without incident because I never took anything. The rule was so deeply embedded in me that it never occurred to me as a choice. You did not take things from Coral Cove. That was simply how it was. The brochure states the third rule plainly. Do not remove any natural material from Coral Cove, including sand, shells, stones, or plant material. If you have taken something unintentionally, return it to the cove and place it as close to its original location as possible. Failure to observe this rule may result in serious harm. That last sentence was added by me. Cressida's version of the brochure did not include it. I added it after talking with a lawyer friend in town who said the phrasing gave the property some coverage in the event of a liability situation. The lawyer did not ask why I needed that phrasing, and I did not volunteer an explanation. Tyler took a shell from Coral Cove on the Saturday afternoon of the group's second day. He did not tell me this at the time. I found out later from Lee, who had watched it happen and said nothing because she did not think it was real. She said Tyler had gone into the small sea cave at the northern end of the cove, the one that is accessible at low tide, and had come out holding a large spiral shell in purple and white. She said he had looked at it for a moment and then put it in his pocket. He gave it to Priya that evening as a gift. She kept it on the windowsill of their room. I noticed nothing unusual that day. Saturday was clear and the guests were relaxed, and the Coral Cove trail had moderate traffic. I did my afternoon walkthrough and everything was as it should be. Saturday night, I happened to look out from the office window toward the cove around 9:30. The water in the cove was darker than it should have been at that hour. It was a clear night and the moon was up, and the cove typically reflects that light. What I saw instead was water that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. I looked at it for a moment and then told myself it was a trick of the angle from the window. I went back to the check-in log I was updating. Sunday morning, Tyler came to the front desk around 9 and said, "Hey, question. Is there anyone who walks around outside the second floor rooms at night? I heard something outside our window around 2. I said, "What kind of something?" He said, "Knocking, 3 times, steady, like someone tapping on glass. We're on the second floor." I said, "There's no balcony or walkway outside those windows." He said, "Right, that's why I'm asking." I said I would look into it. He went to get breakfast. I stood at the window of room 7, which is adjacent to the room Tyler and Priya were in, and looked out at the exterior wall. There is no ledge, no pipe, nothing that would allow a person or a large animal to reach those windows from outside. 3 taps, steady, at 2 in the morning. I went down to Coral Cove alone before any guests were up and moving. I walked the perimeter of the cove and checked the sea cave. The water was its normal color in the morning light, but inside the cave there was something I had not seen before. Along the interior wall where the shells and stones typically cluster, there was a section about 2 feet wide where everything had been cleared away. Not scattered, cleared, as if something had swept that section clean deliberately. In the center of the cleared section, there was a mark on the rock that I do not know how to describe accurately. It was wet and dark and roughly circular, about the size of a man's fist. I left the cove and went back inside to make breakfast. Sunday afternoon, the 5 students went back to Coral Cove together. I was at the front desk dealing with a check-in, a retired couple named Rose and Bertrand who were celebrating their 40th anniversary and who were delightfully uncomplicated guests. I finished getting Rose and Bertrand settled and was about to start my afternoon trail check when Lee came through the main door at a run. She said, "You need to come right now, Tyler's hurt." I said, "How hurt?" She said, "His hand, something in the water." I came out from behind the desk and went with her at a pace that was close to running. When I got to the cove, Tyler was sitting on the sand with his left hand wrapped in Marcus's shirt. The shirt was soaked through red. Devon was kneeling next to Tyler, keeping him sitting upright. Tyler's face was grey and his breathing was shallow and fast. Priya was standing 6 feet away, her back to the water, holding herself with both arms. I knelt next to Tyler and said, "I need to see it." Marcus unwrapped the shirt enough for me to look. Tyler's left index finger was nearly severed at the second joint, not a clean cut, something that had bitten or clamped and pulled. The wound was ragged and deep, and there was a lot of blood. I said to Devon, keep that elevated. Keep it elevated and keep the pressure on. I stood up and called 911. I gave the address and the access route, and the dispatcher confirmed 20 to 25-minute response time given the road. I told her to send 2 units if they had them, and explained the nature of the injury. I went to Priya. I said, the shell, do you have it? She looked at me. She said, it's in the room. I said, I need you to go get it right now and bring it down here. Don't put it in a bag or a pocket. Carry it in your hand. She said, is this because of the shell? I said, please go get it. She went. She was back in 4 minutes. She held the shell out to me with her arm extended like she did not want it close to her body. I took it. Tyler was watching me. He said, what are you doing? I said, what happened in the water? Tell me exactly. He said, I was sitting at the edge with my feet in. My hand was in the water. Something grabbed it. I felt fingers. I pulled back and he stopped. He looked at what remained of his bandaging and did not finish the sentence. I said, you're going to be all right. The ambulance is coming. He said, what was it? I said, I don't know what to call it. He said, was it because of the shell? I looked at him. I said, yes. He closed his eyes. The ambulance came in 23 minutes. The paramedics worked quickly and got Tyler on a gurney and into the vehicle. One of the paramedics asked me what had attacked him, and I said I did not know, that no one had seen it clearly. She looked at me for a moment with an expression that said she had more questions. She did not ask them. They had a patient to move. After the ambulance left, I stood on the trail with the shell in my hand and looked at Priya and Marcus and Devon and Lee, who were standing together near the trailhead. No one said anything for a moment. I said, I'm closing Coral Cove for 3 days. I need all of you to stay off the beach trail until I reopen it. I'll explain the rest later if you want me to. Marcus said, what's the rest? I said, I need to fix what got broken. That's what the rest is. I closed the cove gate, which is a simple wooden gate on a latch that is mostly symbolic, but serves as a clear signal to guests, and I went to make the arrangements. I did not sleep that first night. I sat in the office with the spiral shell on the desk in front of me and thought through everything Cressida had told me about Coral Cove over the years. She had described the atonement ritual once in detail when I was 12. She had described it the way you describe a fire escape procedure. You hope you never need it. You make sure the person responsible knows it anyway. The first step was returning the object. The second was closing the area for 3 days. The third was 3 offerings delivered on consecutive mornings in a specific order. Something sweet, something old, something deeply personal. Not symbolic, genuinely meaningful. Cressida had been clear that the offerings had to cost you something real. She said the ones in the water could tell the difference between a gesture and a sacrifice. She had performed this ritual twice in 50 years. I was performing it in my first year. I did not let myself think too long about what that meant. Monday morning, 5:45. I walked down to Coral Cove before dawn with the shell in my hand and a small jar of local wildflower honey that I had purchased in town and kept in my own pantry rather than the guest kitchen. The water in the cove was still and dark at that hour. I walked out until the water was at my knees. The cold was immediate and sharp. I held the shell under the surface and opened my hand and waited for the current to take it. It sat on my palm for a moment, then lifted and moved and disappeared in the direction of the deeper water with a slowness that did not match the surface movement. I came back to shore and walked to the flat rock at the cove's edge that I recognized from Cressida's description as the boundary point, the place between the land and the water where the terms of the arrangement were understood by both sides. I set the honey jar on the rock. I did not say anything. Cressida had said words were optional for the offering, but honesty was not. I felt the weight of what had happened in my chest, the fact that a 20-year-old was in a hospital right now because I had not done enough to prevent this, and I let that feeling be present rather than pushing it aside. I went back up the trail. I did not look back at the rock. Monday night, I was in the office around 11 when I heard it from the direction of the beach. Not waves, a regular impact, steady and deliberate, something solid meeting the rock face at the edge of the cove in a rhythm that did not come from water. It continued for about 20 minutes and then stopped. I sat at my desk and did not move until it stopped. Tuesday morning, I walked down with the second offering. The jar of honey was gone from the boundary rock. Nothing had been left in its place. The rock was completely bare and dry, which, given that it sits 6 feet from the waterline at high tide, was mildly notable on its own. The The second offering was the silver bracelet that had belonged to Cressida. She had worn it every day for 30 years. I found it in the small wooden box on her dresser after she died. The metal was worn smooth at the inside of the band from decades of contact with her skin. I set it on the boundary rock. I said out loud, "I'm sorry. What happened should not have happened, and I take responsibility for it. I'm sorry it cost that young man what it cost him. I am trying to make this right." I stood there for a moment and then went back up. Tuesday night was completely silent, not normal coastal silence. A deeper quiet, the kind where you become aware of the sounds your own body makes and nothing outside is competing with them. I found it harder to sit with than the tapping had been. Wednesday morning, the bracelet was gone. The third offering was a pocket knife that had belonged to my grandfather. Cressida gave it to me when I was 16 and told me it had been in his pocket every day of his adult life. The handle is oak, smooth and dark from years of handling, and there is a small notch in the blade from some unknown incident before my time. I had kept it in the top drawer of my desk since I was 16, and I had never used it. It was the most personal object I owned that had any weight to it. I carried it down in my closed fist. When I set it on the boundary rock, I kept my hand on it for a moment before I let go. Then I stepped back. I stood at the boundary rock for longer than the previous 2 mornings, maybe 10 minutes. The water in the cove was its normal color. The light came in at an angle through the rock formation, and the bottom was visible and clear. I said, "That's everything I have that means something. I hope it's enough." I walked back up the trail and opened the cove gates. That afternoon, I walked the cove alone before allowing any guests back. The water was calm and clear. The boundary rock was empty. The knife and the bracelet and the honey were gone in the same way that everything left on that rock was always gone. In the sea cave, I checked the interior wall. The cleared section was still there, but the dark circular mark was gone. In its place, centered in the cleared space, was a single shell. White, no trace of purple. Smaller than the one Tyler had taken, perfectly formed, placed with its opening facing up. I looked at it for a long moment, and then turned around and went back to the main building. That evening, I called the hospital and was told Tyler was out of surgery and recovering, and that the surgeons had been able to reattach the finger with a good prognosis for function. I sat with that information for a while before I said anything. Then I said out loud to no one in particular, to the office, to the building, to whatever was present in the general atmosphere of this place, "Thank you." 2 days later, Tyler called the front desk personally. He said, "I read the brochure rule again from the hospital about not taking things." There was a pause. He said, "I want to say I'm sorry to you specifically. You told me the rules. I didn't take them seriously." I said, "I understand. You didn't know." He said, "But you told me." I said, "Yes, I did." Another pause. He said, "Is there anything I should do? Like, is there anything I owe?" I thought about that question for a moment. I said, "You already paid for it, Tyler." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Yeah," and that was the end of the call. It has been 4 weeks since the Coral Cove incident. Tyler's finger healed well according to the follow-up update Lee sent me in a text. He will have a significant scar and some reduced sensitivity in the fingertip, but full function is expected. I was glad to hear it, and I told her so. The morning ritual has continued without interruption. Red mug, white bowl of sugar, flat stone, 5 minutes. The chip in the rim of the red mug has not come back. The mug looks like a different object than it did 11 months ago. The same object, but somehow more resolved, if that makes any sense. I think about Cressida every morning when I pick it up, and that is not an unwelcome thing. I rewrote the third rule in the brochure. The new version says, "Do not remove any natural material from Coral Cove. This includes shells, stones, sand, plant material, and any other object that originates within the cove. If you have taken something, return it immediately and completely to its original location." This rule is enforced by the cove itself and not by hotel management. We cannot protect you if you take something. We can only help you return it. That last part is new. I wrote it at 2 in the morning the week after Tyler was discharged, and I have not changed it since. I think it is more honest than the previous version. Rose and Bertrand, the anniversary couple who had checked in while Tyler was being put in the ambulance, came to find me on their checkout day. Bertrand shook my hand for a long time. He said they had spent 40 years looking for a place where they felt genuinely away from everything, and that this was the first time they had found it. Rose said she had slept better here than she had in years. She asked if I ever had availability in June because they wanted to come back with their daughter. I said yes, and I gave them a card. I did not tell them what had happened at the cove the previous weekend. There was no reason to. Their experience of this place was what it was, and the rules had governed their visit without incident because they had followed the rules. That is how it usually goes. The woman in the red coat has appeared twice in the elevator since Harrison. Both times she greeted me and I greeted her back, and the ride was brief and uneventful. I noticed on the second occasion that she was looking at me differently than before, or maybe I was just paying closer attention. There was something in her expression that I could not identify as recognition exactly, but also not as nothing. I said good evening and she said good evening Aldous, and the doors opened and she was gone. I stood in the parking garage for a moment and then went to my car. The ribbon trees stand where they always have. The large oak behind the main building is going into its winter state, the leaves coming down steadily over the past 2 weeks. In spring, it will be the same tree it always is, and the red cord on the trunk will be visible again in the way it always is. I will replace the cord in March the way I do every year. I will do it quickly, one section at a time, and I will say thank you when I am finished. A new couple checked in last Friday, late 20s from Portland, here for a long weekend. When I handed them the brochure and watched them read it, I noticed the woman read through all 3 rules twice, carefully, the way Lee had. Her partner read it once and set it on the counter. I said, please keep that with you during your stay. He picked it back up and put it in his pocket. They seem to be having a good time. I can see from the office window that they have been down to Coral Cove twice. Each time they came back up empty-handed. I have not gone down to check the sea cave since reopening the cove. I will check it at some point, but I am in no hurry. Some things you let settle before you look at them again. On Saturday morning, I carried the red mug and the white bowl out to the flat stone as always. I sat down on the ground with my back to the building and my face toward the forest. The air was cold and clear and smelled like the ocean and like the fallen leaves and like the particular quality of Northern California coastal morning that I have breathed every day of my life. I sat for 5 minutes without moving. The forest was quiet except for something that moved in the leaves about 20 feet in, something small, gone before I could see it. I said thank you out loud before I stood up. Then I went back inside to start the day. This land doesn't belong to me. I know that now the way Cressida knew it. Not as a polite idea, but as a real fact that governs how I move through this place every single day. My grandfather is under that tree. My grandmother is scattered at its roots. I grew up in the shadow of it, and I will probably end up here too when the time comes. We are all just borrowing it. The mug and bowl were empty when I checked at 11. The new guests are down at the cove right now, from what I can see. They are sitting on the rocks at the edge of the water with their feet up, looking out at the Pacific. Their hands are in their laps. They are not taking anything.